Good morning, everybody. Welcome to ReadyTech's Remote Control Series, Episode 5. Today we'll be covering, as mentioned last week, we'll be covering off working together even when you are remote, which is a relatively broad topic of conversation. And today we're really going to try and focus in on those areas of remote working that are the most easily addressed. So very much around information sharing, information centralisation. We're going to talk through some of the ways that you can better connect and interact with your colleagues and peers and also your clients. So joining me today is the eternal Mr. Ben Conlon. Morning, Ben.
Eternal, James. That's a nice way of putting it. Good morning.
How are you, firstly?
I'm very well, as always. Enjoying myself. A bit cool down here on the south coast of New South Wales.
Okay. There's a bit of cloud and a bit of rain around Sydney as well. So you're going to be steering us through some of the practical pieces later on today's session. So welcome to that. Quick housekeeping. For those who haven't participated in any of the remote control series so far, the recordings from all the other sessions that we've had are available at readytech.remote control employment services. So I encourage you to go and have a look at those. In your either bottom or top menu of your screen, you'll see a bar, and in there is a Q&A tab. We will be taking questions throughout the session, but likely we'll park those and address those questions at the end of today's session. There is time allocated for that. We do have around 45 minutes scheduled for today. There is a chance that we could finish a fraction early, which I'm sure won't disappoint too many people. And you know, we will be sharing today's slide deck and today's recording after we've edited out some of the nonsense that typically gets brought up, and we'll be making that available on the remote control website. We do have a few other sessions scheduled, but they're not actually available to register for them yet. That registration will be available from next week, and the next session is booked for a few weeks from now. So keep an eye on the remote control website for that information. So working remotely even when you're not, and staying connected. So Ben, you and I have had a number of conversations again with our customers and with the market, and there's a theme that keeps reoccurring in those conversations, which is very much around how the information that historically, sort of pre-COVID, has been shared almost organically or informally in offices around Australia, and what is affectionately referred to as water cooler chats and whatnot. But I think one of the challenges that has been the most pronounced in the last couple of months whilst we've been in lockdown has been the transition or the transference of that information or that data. So today we're going to explore some of the points of which data gets shared, what data gets shared, how it becomes useful. So do you want to just talk us through, what we've coined or what we've labelled the essential workflow?
Yeah, sure. So this is in terms of usage or looking at technology. Really, what technology does is it gives you the tools to turn data into information into knowledge, and knowledge into power. Okay, so data itself doesn't mean anything. Okay, so it only means something when it's in context.
Yep.
So by which I mean data is just a series of bits of information, but you put those into context, and then it becomes the information that you can then turn into knowledge. So if we were to look at an example, to get slightly less esoteric, James, which you're always encouraging me to do, if we were to look at a really practical example of this, what we do in employment services is we really take somebody along a journey, and it's a journey to independence. Okay, so somebody comes in to see us. they're disadvantaged. They've had whatever's going on in their life, and it's our job to marshal all the resources that we have at our disposal in order to move them to a point where they can become independent. And the strongest thing in my days as a case manager, I used to say to people is, you don't want to be talking to the likes of me. so let's do the work together. So you never have to see them again. And people were strangely keen on that notion. But the point is that what the systems are there to do is to give you the resources and give you the tools in order to get that person to move through that process.
Yeah. So I think that idea about data, and I'm sure everyone on today's session would have seen an increase in the conversation or the amount of times that data gets referenced inside their own organisations. And I think that point around data becoming information when in context is incredibly valid and something that we'll have a look at in a bit more detail on today's call.
Yeah.
Just for those who weren't involved in last week's session, we talked really about how we can start to manage our own data as an individual inside a larger organisation. And today's very much about how the organisation can then leverage groups of people utilising or accessing that data and ultimately bringing those into a centralised point or centralised unit, so they can start to do what you're describing, which is turn that data into information and ultimately knowledge. So do you want to sort of expand on the actions that is kind of referenced under that knowledge piece?
Okay, so when we get into this continuum, so we've got data, we've contextualized it, it now becomes information. We go, okay, what's the purposes of this information? Why do we have this information? Why are we gathering this information, right? And then that will then give us the information. In there, I'm talking about reporting, I'm talking about things like that, and I'm also talking about consolidating all that information into knowledge, right? So what I'm saying is you've got, for example, you've got a report on a labour market. Okay, so you've got a bunch of data that's on a labour market, then you turn that information by getting a report on that information or that data, and then you turn that into knowledge by analysis of that report, and then you turn that into power by taking action on your knowledge about the labour market in order to target jobs for your job seekers. Very simple, very basic example of what we're doing here. But it's the systems that allow you to do that, and it's the systems that allow you to do that efficiently. If we then take that to the next level, if we have a look at that knowledge that we've got, which is based on the reporting, based on the compliance, based on, all the stuff around what we know about our caseload, what we know about our labour market, and what we know about where people are up to, for example, in a post-placement support workflow or cycle, right? If we then use that knowledge to leverage a workflow, okay, so we know the steps that need to take, example, post-placement support. We know because of analysis of the data that the most likely point for somebody to drop out of placement is at say 12 weeks. Okay, so if we know that that's the most likely point that they're to drop out, then we can have a look at our demographic. We can see who's more likely to drop out. We can see, we can basically look at jobs at risk. We can understand that based on the information. And then from that, we can establish a workflow and set up some post-placement support schedules that are more than, I will call this guy every week or I will call this guy every fortnight. They then become, we know that this person, based on the information that we've got, the historical information that we've got, we know that somebody who's in this age range, okay, at this level of employment is this likely to stick in a job at 12 weeks. Therefore, we know that this person is high risk. So we're going to put in a much stronger and a much more structured post-placement support, right? Alternatively, we know that this person from this demographic has only a 10% chance of dropping out before the 12-week. So we are not going to waste our resources, because resources are precious, right? So we're going to have a much lighter post-placement support structure for that person. Yeah. So that's really when knowledge becomes power. When knowledge put into action gives you the capacity to make the decisions about how your workflows are going to work. Does that make sense, James?
Yeah, it does. And I think workflow gets talked as a buzzword, every conversation almost that we have with clients and organizations
Yeah.
out in the market. And I think there's many different ways to describe it, but I think what you've just walked us through there, those two sort of examples, it does kind of strip away the noise and simplify, what the definition of a workflow is, and using information and data to actually design useful workflows, not just workflows for the sake of operating manuals. So just to go into a little bit more detail for today's session, some of the things we're going to, the first topic of exploration is an extension of last week. So knowing and understanding your systems, we really dived in last week and looked at just knowing the systems that you're using, whether they be a third-party system like JobReady Live, whether they be a CRM, a finance system, a system that you have personally put together, maybe some spreadsheets. I know that many people wouldn't admit that they've got some spreadsheets that they use, but I believe that they're still out there. So we're going to just look at knowing your systems and sort of completing the circle on that. Then we're going to look at the centralisation, particularly around the communication. So understanding and building that trust around the data that you've collected, consolidating it and centralising the approach. So basically turning that data into information and then leveraging the system. So how do you actually go about designing, refining, rebuilding your workflows now that you have a better understanding of the data? You now have more knowledge around that data, and that is kind of arriving at that point of power that we saw in that previous slide. So what we're going to do, Ben, is I'm going to make sure that we keep revisiting these key themes, because you've got a tendency to drift off into.
I do digress, yeah.
Yeah. So I will hold you to account. I'm sure everyone on the call will also be doing that. As we go through, Ben's going to actually show us some samples and some scenarios in the system that we currently provide, which is JobReady Live. I know there's actually a few of you on today's session that use JobReady Live, so I'm sure you're very keen to see some of the other elements that are possible, or avenues that are possible inside that system. Please, I'll be monitoring Q&A whilst we go through this, so please throw your questions in there. And as I said, we'll either address those on the fly, or we'll park those and address them in the Q&A session. So Ben, I'm going to stop sharing screen and let you take control.
Okay, thank you.
So where are you going to start off today?
Well, I'm going to start, as always, at the at the dashboard, right? Oh. But this is the dashboard. Like, in terms of what we're talking about here is control of communication, right? So this is a central repository of information. Okay, I'm not going to go too much through this, but basically this is a central piece, a central source of truth in terms of what a case manager looks at during the day. But we can do, in terms of controlling the communications, a good example for this, and a good example of communications that often go awry, is around vacancies. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll take you to the jobs board. So this is an example of the jobs board, the JobReady jobs board. All vacancies that are listed end up on this jobs board. This is the central repository, or the central set of information for people who are looking to find jobs for their participants. Now, I know that very often in DARES, the focus is very much on individual reverse marketing for each person. Now, that's actually a good example of where communication can go awry, because if I'm reverse marketing for my person who's, for argument's sake, an administration person, and I identify that the company's looking for a store person, then I'm going to want to list that vacancy. I'm going to want to make that available to my caseload. In Job Active, it's very much about an employer engagement. It's very much about doing that work, getting that information up. Where communications go awry, and there's a couple of things. The most common thing that I heard when I was running employer-facing teams from the business development people is, I can't get anybody to refer people to my jobs, right? By the same token, the most common thing I heard from the case managers was, I can't get those business development people to refer my clients to the jobs. Now, both of those things can't be true. So the only explanation for that is that there's a mismatch in communication. So there's a couple of things there. Are the jobs available? Can people see the jobs? Are we giving all the information that somebody needs in order to identify and push that person through to the job? A couple of ways that that's traditionally done. It's done through buzz meetings in the morning, identifying your top 10, identifying your vacancies. It's done through emails. It's done through phone conversations. It's done through water cooler conversations.
Sure.
Which is great when it works, but it's not reliable and it's not systematic. So
it's also very difficult when you find yourself in the situation that we're in now, right?
Oh, well, it's impossible in the situation we're in. Well, you can still send an email, but I suppose that just like a broader context for this information for this consolidation of information and communication here is that what this allows you to do is allows you to be really consistent in what you're doing. So in terms of a recommendation for a job seeker, you see we've got a bunch of information on this. I won't go through the recommendation system because I want to show you the other end of it. But you recommend a job seeker, a JPO or a business development person can identify the structure and identify, basically put a checklist in as to who's going to be there or who's your applicant is. And then when we come through, I'll take you to the, then when we come through to the recommendation piece, so recommendations go into the system. And this is where we see what's going on with the recommendation. So if we think about this in the context that we're talking about before, where we're controlling our communication, we're changing data into information and information into knowledge. We've got the data around the job, around what's required for the job. We've got the information in terms of making the job available and letting people know that it's there. We're turning that information into knowledge once we've gone through the process of referring somebody, and we're consolidating that communication. What Job Ready Live does is it gives you immediately some information or some data, right? Some data on the status of the person. So here we can see people, there's job seeker names, case managers, stream, all the information across here. But this is an example of these alerts are an example of the system changing data, information, knowledge to power, right? Because here we see alerts for a person who's been referred as to their status. Now, the implication of you referring a pending job seeker to a job and that job seeker getting that before they've commenced on your program is obvious, right? Mm-hmm. And it happens. People exited job seekers get referred, all of those things. So this, in my view, is just it's a simple example, and there's much more complex examples of this process. But this is a simple example from the perspective of controlling communications and how that then flows through to that workflow we were talking about earlier.
Sure. Yeah. And I think one of the topics that we'll discuss a bit later as well is when there's the common behavior and there's, everyone is brought into the same process or workflow.
Yeah.
You then move into a predictability process where that you start to trust the data, you start to trust the information that you're presented with, like this view that you've just shown us, which actually makes your job significantly easier. You're not having to quantify or qualify that data because you know and trust that the information that you're being presented with is accurate. And because the system in this case is notifying you of any changes or adjustments to that information, you're not having to go and find that somewhere else. And I think you talked about this stuff living potentially in email threads and spreadsheets, whatever. Once you have that consolidated view, you then have a much more efficient way of taking action or extracting that knowledge out of that information.
Yeah, indeed. And I think that, like if we sort of, that sounded to me like a segue to consolidate data, James. So if we look at, if we look at the natural thing that happens here, like the natural progress from here, okay, so we've identified the vacancy, we've identified the person, you know, we've referred or recommended the person on the system, referred the person, and then we get to a placement. And now this is where we start to see that data consolidation really starting to pay off, okay? So this is all about bringing data from here into and becoming increasingly focused on the purpose that we're doing to identify where this person's coming from. So if I go to a placement, we've got a summary report that you can see here. Now there's a couple of things. Oh, I'll just clear that filter. There's a couple of things with the summary report. What this is so that once somebody is placed, you obviously triggers a post-placement support schedule. The system allows you to set schedules for job seekers. As I said before, you can set frequency of contact, you can set type of contact. Importantly, you can also set the trigger for the kinds of forms that you want to identify to gather further data, right? So I suppose the earlier conversation about that workflow makes it feel like it's linear, but that data gathering system happens at every stage of the workflow. And remember, we're constantly collecting that data in order to focus on the purpose, which is to get the person independent, right? Not even to get them in a job, right? Not even to get them placed, not even get them there for 13 weeks. It's to get them operating independently, right? So if we go in and have a look at this placement, okay, I can see a whole bunch, again, all the information that's needed about this job seeker, right? So if I take action on this job seeker, I can also see here that their next support due date's fairly overdue, would be fair to say. And what we're doing now is we're consolidating that data, and what we have done now is that we've triggered a workflow. Now we've triggered a workflow which is based on the knowledge that we have in terms of the need for post-placement support and how that structure works, okay? So this is about leveraging your knowledge to trigger your workflow to turn it into power, right? So if I'll just take you through this process because it's instructive. So what I've done is I've contacted the job seeker. There's a bunch of stuff in here. Like if I put unsuccessful in here, it'll structure another call. It won't let me drop out. It won't take the reminder off. Okay. But we see here what the stage is. We go to support date and we go save and launch form. This is always, okay. So what we can see here is the information on the job seeker, the date of birth, and all of those things. This is going to trigger a whole bunch of information around the job seeker, which you then need to sign off on, okay? This form can also be used like a placement checklist, like a timing checklist, and all of those things, okay? So if I put a signature on this, so this is my signature, and then I submit that form. Oh, sorry, just bear with me here.
Always a trap.
Always a trap. Actually, I might just jump back from here. And I'll do it at a different stage.
And had you had time to finish the configuration, those fields would have populated with the job seeker.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But, nevertheless.
Okay.
You missed one. You need to sign yours as well. There you go.
Yeah. Okay.
There you go.
Thank you, James.
Welcome.
So what that then does is submits that form, okay? Now, there are a number of workflows that we can drive from here, but there are also workflows that we can drive which are around wage history and structuring the wage history for that person from this placement. So it's
just on that quickly.
Yeah.
Again, in the theme of so that data consolidation, can everyone see that form now? Is that form now available to be viewed, or is it just for you to see?
Can everyone see which form?
So the form you just completed,
yeah,
is that form now available for anyone?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that form then becomes available for everybody who goes into the placement. That form's then lodged against the placement, becomes part of the evidence, triggers wage histories, and so on.
I guess why I bring that up is I think we've seen a number of scenarios and situations where people would be using a Word document or a PDF that lives outside, and then that form could potentially be emailed as an attachment somewhere else and get lost or find
Yeah.
to a SharePoint.
Yeah.
So I think we're trying to draw attention to the fact that we can bring that stuff into the one place, right?
Yeah, so we're drawing attention to that, but also we're drawing attention to the fact that you can use those forms and you can use the workflow within the system to trigger various levels of compliance and evidence and data gathering, in effect, right? Okay. So just if we move from there in terms of, so we've consolidated the data, now we're talking about centralising processes. So I've talked about centralising processes in terms of establishing those forms, establishing those workflows. If we then work through to an outcome, okay, because so we've got the vacancy, we've placed the person, we've gone through post-placement support schedule with the person, we've gathered the evidence. What do we do with that placement now, right? So if I go into this situation, there's a central claims unit functionality.
Okay.
So again, I can then structure that and submit that claim to the central claims unit.
Okay.
So once that, so the claims we see here, claims compliant, claim status is approved. So in this case, the claim's already gone through to the central claims unit. But just working through this, if I then go and show you the functionality for the central claims unit. So the central claims unit is based on the concept of Kanban, which is a concept that comes from Japanese manufacturing. It means notice board, does it? Or shops front or something?
Loosely.
Yeah. So basically what it does is it gives you or gives the user the capacity to consolidate the communications around a workflow. And this is probably the most explicit example of a workflow where the communications are consolidated, okay? So if we have a look at the flow here, once a claim is submitted, so that's submitted to the central claims unit, it comes into the inbox.
And
that claim.
Just before you dive into that detail, I think it's important to note two things. The first is, as Ben said, it's a consolidated view, which means that all the activity that relates to claims has been brought into one place. The second and probably most valuable point to make is it's in real time. So we often see what you would call latency or lag in the processing of something like a claim. And there's things that cause that, like evidence gathering and people not having access to the right information at the right point, so they have to go away and find that. What's been attempted here is to try and bring a real-time view of every single claim incident within the organisation, and everyone that has the appropriate permission or their jobs are reliant on or they are responsible for managing this part of the business, they can see this information in real time. And as their colleagues and peers and teammates make a change or move something through the workflow as Ben's describing, you will see that in real time, which is really powerful.
Thanks, James. So just, I mean, without, basically, so you grab the claim, it can then go to, for example, on hold. Now, every time there's a change in claim state, there's a communication process that goes back to the person lodging that claim, and this is completely visible, okay, to everybody who's in the process. So I can update that claim state, right? I can also obviously put templates in. I can automate a whole bunch of stuff there. But importantly, it also gives you the capacity to request and review additional information. So if I take here and I go, and I know those CCU people or claims management people here will be struggling to imagine a time when a claim was lodged without all the necessary evidence, but bear with me here, guys. Okay, so you can template that. You can put a change reason in there, which would be reason 4. You go need pay slip, for example. Then you can drop the evidence there, tag it, and update that claim state. And I must select. Now, the thing is that once that claim state is updated, it then translates back and reminds the case manager. Okay, so it reminds the case manager that there's a claim that's been submitted to the central claims unit and there's additional information required. Every time you see here, so you can see consolidating information, right? We can see the results. So we can see here there's a claim lodged, there's information provided for this person that's been submitted to CCU. So we can see the entire process here. So everybody's always got complete visibility of their claims. Yeah. When somebody goes to a claim that's submitted to CCU and there's individual information required, they then grab that information, provide that information. That will then move the claim along to the next step on the workflow on CCU. The person grabs the information, moves it through till it's lodged and claimed and so on, okay? So just aware of time, James. Yeah. I hope I haven't digressed too much. I get
no. I think
a bit of a rabbit hole sometimes.
Using those specific examples is the easiest and best way to articulate, the broader conversation point, which was very much about the consolidation. So
yeah.
Just if anyone's got any questions just off the back of that scenario that we just walked through, throw them in the in the Q&A section. We still have another 5 minutes or so, Ben. Do you want to just, I suppose, talk through those last couple of points quickly before we go into Q&A? So leveraging your systems, and whether it's and I know we've looked at a couple of screens from Job Ready Live today, but are there any other systems that people are using right now, whether they be third-party systems, or are you still using Outlook heavily? Is your role in your business still using a lot of email threads to track workflows and processes, spreadsheets still in abundance in your organizations, or anything else that you're using to try and bring some of this information together? We have undoubtedly been sort of approached multiple times to try and unpick some of these challenges with people, multiple solutions or multiple products, and try and bring this information together. Do you want to just summarize, the eyes on the prize? And we finished on this last week, yeah. But how does this, what you've shown today, how does that actually help us maintain that plan, or that goal of creating an independent individual?
So all of this is really about keeping your eyes on the prize. Okay, there's nothing particularly like looking at the example from the referral, from the recommendation of the person. Right, keep your eyes on the prize. If you want to identify whether you've got somebody who's pending, right, that you've referred, you want to make sure that you've got those step backs, or those quality assurance steps through the entire system, in terms of your quality assurance around your claims identification, but in many ways, more importantly, your quality assurance around your post-placement support, around your scheduling, around your capacity to communicate the information about the needs, the support needs of your candidate, right? Really important that that happens internally and that those support schedules are structured. That's why, you know, reminder schedules, internal CRM, Live's got an internal CRM, which has got a participant CRM in there. So you can allocate reminders, you can, you know, you can, if you're going on leave or for whatever reason, you can allocate your reminders. You can keep that consistent communication through. Keeping the eyes on the prize is about attention to detail, and it's about attention to how those structures work and working through a methodology and a set of workflows that you have evidence, because you've got the data, you've got the information, and you've got the knowledge, you've got evidence that that's going to succeed. So you're not making it up. Do you know what I mean? Which makes it easier for everybody concerned.
Yeah. And I think, you know, to sort of end on that point, that the challenge in the scenarios that we find ourselves in right now, this will be a lasting impact. The idea of working remotely, I think, will stay, and we'll see, you know, potentially a more blended operating model across the whole space. So the idea of being able to bring the, you know, really valuable information together into one place, so it's, you know, it's predictable, you can then start to introduce a far more efficient way of working. So we'll open the floor to questions. We didn't get any questions through that session, so it was either incredibly informative and covered every consideration, or people were so enthralled that they just couldn't peel themselves away to jump into the Q&A. We'll just leave it open for a couple of minutes. If there's no questions, that's completely fine. And as I said, we'll circulate the recording and today's deck to everyone that attended today, so that you can obviously circulate that internally to anyone who you think might find it useful. Nothing coming through from the floor, so we might just wrap it up there, Ben. Thank you very much for putting today together. That was really, really useful, and I think it closes off nicely the main topic that we wanted to explore, which was how COVID-19 was going to impact our remote working and the challenges that we're facing right now. As we start to look at a world out, as we recover and organisations start to open, I'm sure there's plenty on today's session that are still working from the office or are looking at going back to the office in the next couple of weeks. These skills and lessons and learnings will be valuable, I think, moving forward. So thanks for everyone that joined us today. Have a great rest of the Thursday, and we will see you all soon. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you. Bye now.